Women of Reddit share the dirtiest things they've ever done. Story 1. One night after a long day at work, I was unwinding with a few friends online, deep into a late-night gaming session. Everything was going as usual, laughs, trash talk, and the occasional clutch play, until my wife came down the stairs. She gave me that familiar look, the one that says she had something mischievous in mind. Without saying a word, she sat on my lap, catching me completely off guard mid-match. My friends noticed the sudden shift in my focus and started joking around, telling me not to abandon them mid-game. My wife, never one to back away from a little fun, grabbed my headset and said playfully, "You guys don't mind being part of this, do you?" One of my more daring friends egged her on, not expecting her to actually respond. She glanced at me for a moment, waiting for a nod. I gave a small one, and that's when things got interesting. She started whispering playful things into the mic, nothing too wild, but definitely enough to make my friends pause. Their reactions were a mix of disbelief and laughter, unsure whether to call our bluff or keep listening. My wife was clearly enjoying the attention, adding just enough spice to keep things flirty without crossing the line. She made a show of being extra affectionate, making sure every sound and word left no doubt about who had my attention. My friends, now fully invested in the spectacle, kept teasing us, throwing in comments that only fueled her boldness. She responded with a few cheeky remarks, telling them they were missing out. It was one of the wildest, funniest nights we've had. Unexpected, a little chaotic, and definitely memorable. Ever since then, the guys haven't stopped asking when my wife's going to crash game night again. She plays along with the teasing, and let's just say, they're still waiting. Story 2. It was nearly 3 a.m., and I couldn't sleep. The house was quiet, the air unusually still, and my thoughts were far too loud. I tossed and turned before finally giving in to the restless energy building inside me. I stepped outside for some fresh air, dressed only in what I had been wearing to bed, just enough to feel the cool night breeze on my skin. That's when an idea crossed my mind. Bold, maybe reckless, but undeniably thrilling. My neighbor, Mr. Walker, was usually up late. We'd exchanged polite conversations before, smiles across the driveway, the occasional small talk at the mailbox. But there was always something unspoken hanging in the air, an electricity I couldn't quite ignore. I walked over and knocked softly on his door. When he answered, his expression shifted from surprise to curiosity as he saw me standing there. "Sophia? What are you doing out here like that?" he asked, eyes flickering with restrained concern. "I locked myself out," I said, hugging my arms around my chest, pretending to shiver. I didn't even realize until I came outside for a second. He hesitated for a beat, then stepped aside. "Come in. You'll catch a cold out there." The warmth of his home wrapped around me, but it was his presence that made the air feel charged. As we talked, I noticed the way his eyes occasionally lingered, and I couldn't help but enjoy the attention. I adjusted my waistband casually, watching his reaction out of the corner of my eye. We sat in the living room, the quiet hum of the night between us. I leaned in slightly, smiling. "You know, you really don't look your age," I said, letting the edge of my voice carry something more than just a compliment. He chuckled, a little caught off guard. "Well, thank you. You're not exactly hard on the eyes either, Sophia." The tension between us was growing, unspoken but undeniable. I dropped my phone, maybe not entirely by accident, and when I bent down to pick it up, I felt his gaze on me like a touch. Still, he said nothing, maybe unsure, maybe waiting. I looked at him again. "Would it be okay if I stayed the night? My parents are out of town, and I don't really feel like being alone." He nodded, his voice quiet. "Of course. You can take the couch, or the bed if you want." "I'll take the couch," I said at first, but after a few minutes of lying there, the silence felt too heavy. So I crept down the hallway and gently pushed open his bedroom door. He turned over, surprised. "Sophia?" "I couldn't sleep," I whispered. It felt lonely out there. I climbed under the blanket, close enough to feel his warmth. The room was still, and the only sound was the quiet rhythm of our breathing. As I shifted closer, our bodies aligned, and I could sense the effect I was having on him. The moment was delicate, intimate, charged with anticipation. Nothing needed to be said. The night unfolded between us in quiet, wordless understanding. Everything was slow, electric, and filled with a kind of intensity one hadn't expected. The rest of the world faded away. When morning came, light spilled through the curtains, and we were still there, close, content, and wrapped in the warmth of something we hadn't dared speak aloud until now. Story 3. Last week, I had some time off work, and my girlfriend invited me to stay at her place. She still had to go into the office, but that didn't bother me. I was just excited to spend the week with her. Before she picked me up, she called with a playful tone in her voice and gave me a very specific instruction that made my heart race. She told me to wait for her, in the garage, with nothing on, not even a shirt. Just me, my backpack, and my nerves. When I got her message, I took a deep breath, followed her instructions, and quietly slipped out to the garage. She texted me to open the gate, though when I did, she wasn't there. I started to second-guess everything, especially when a couple of people passed by on the street. My heart pounded, but I stood my ground, the thrill of it making everything feel heightened and surreal. 10 minutes later, her car finally pulled in. I opened my mouth to scold her for making me wait like that, but she just smirked, stepped out, and walked over to me. She leaned in close, her breath warm on my ear, and whispered something that made me forget all about the wait. Then, without missing a beat, she pulled a leash from her bag and clipped it to a collar she slid gently around my neck. I blushed, grabbed my bag, and she led me to the car like it was the most natural thing in the world. As we drove, she asked me what I'd packed. I replied, just clothes. She looked at me for a moment, then tossed the bag into the back seat. "You won't be needing those," she said with a grin. The rest of the ride was filled with teasing. She gave me playful orders, making me squirm in my seat. By the time we arrived at her place, I was a flustered mess, partly embarrassed but mostly excited. At her front door, she took her time unlocking it. I stood next to her, trying not to lose my composure. Once inside, she had me follow another set of instructions, all designed to test my patience and obedience. The way she watched me made it obvious. She loved seeing how far I would go for her. That night, she didn't let me finish. She kept me right on the edge, whispering things that made my knees weak. When I finally collapsed into bed, I was breathless and aching for more. The next morning, she made me breakfast before heading to work. Before leaving, she handed me a few things to keep me occupied, a box of surprises and a list of daily tasks. She even gave me a quiet reminder of her control, something small and discreet that I'd have to wear while she was gone. Later, when the doorbell rang, I froze. It was the delivery guy. I answered the door, trying to act normal, but I'm sure my flushed face gave me away. He handed me the package and gave a confused smile before walking off. I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror afterward and couldn't help but laugh. I definitely didn't look like someone who had just answered the door casually. Each day brought something different. A new instruction, a new game, a new challenge. My girlfriend was creative, and she knew exactly how to keep me craving her attention. Even when she wasn't home, it felt like she was always there, pulling the strings. One afternoon, she came home early and found me mid-task. She didn't say a word at first, just smiled, clipped the leash back on, and pulled me close. The rest of that evening was a blur of whispered commands, gentle restraint, and shared laughter. She never let me lose sight of who was in charge, and I loved every second of it. By the end of the week, I was completely worn out, but in the best way. She had pushed every boundary, but always with care and connection. Before she dropped me off at home, she gave me one final task, something bold, something unforgettable. And as I walked to my front door, still following her final command, I realized something. This wasn't just play. It was trust, it was connection, and it was one of the most intense, freeing experiences I've ever had. Story 4. The sun was bright when we left for the cinema, but I'd chosen my outfit with the evening in mind. A light sundress that swayed with every step, a bold red thong beneath, and nothing else. I wanted to feel a little daring, a little free. We were there to watch a late showing, an 18-plus thriller that had just opened. The theater was nearly empty, just two other people scattered far apart in the rows below. We tucked ourselves into the back corner, perfect for sharing whispers and snacks without being disturbed. As the lights dimmed and the opening credits rolled, my boyfriend rested his hand on my leg. At first, it was innocent, or at least it seemed that way. But I felt the change with each slow movement of his fingers. His touch crept higher, just brushing the hem of my dress, grazing my skin in a way that made my breath catch. The screen flickered in front of us, but I wasn't paying much attention anymore. Every time his hand made another pass, it lingered a little longer. I shifted in my seat, heart racing, a quiet thrill building in my chest. He leaned in and whispered something teasing in my ear, his voice low and rough. I turned to him with a smile, lifted the side of my dress ever so slightly, and gave him a glimpse, just enough to make his eyes widen. His hand slid against the thin fabric of my thong, and I bit my lip, trying to keep quiet. The tension between us was electric, pulsing through every stolen glance and heated breath. Then I gently pushed his hand away, whispering, "Not yet." He pulled back, but I caught his fingers and brought them to my lips, giving him a knowing look as I kissed them gently. The rest of the film played on, but the real story was happening in that quiet corner of the theater. When we got back home, the moment we stepped through the door, the energy between us snapped like a rubber band. He grabbed me, and the passion we'd been holding back all night finally burst free. Story 5. I've always been confident, in my body, in the way I carry myself, and yeah, in the bedroom too. At 30, I'm in shape, self-assured, and I've never had trouble keeping a partner satisfied. But there are some experiences that no amount of confidence can prepare you for. Dina was one of my mom's longtime friends. She was older, early 50s maybe, but carried herself with a grace and quiet fire that turned heads and held them. Curvy, elegant, and sharper than most people twice her age. She came over one weekend to help my mom with something. Casual, nothing special. Or so I thought. Mom had stepped out for a bit, leaving us alone in the kitchen. We were chatting. Light teasing, playful jabs. I thought I was steering the conversation like I always do, but then she stopped, looked me dead in the eyes, and said, "You don't have to pretend with me, sweet boy." I froze. "I've seen the way you look at me," she added, stepping closer, her voice low and deliberate. I didn't know what to say. Dina didn't give me a chance. She placed a hand on my chest, firm but gentle, and leaned in. "I'll give you something you'll never forget," she whispered, "but you won't be in charge." I thought she was just teasing me, trying to get a rise, but the way she looked at me, that wasn't a question. That was a promise. Before I could even process it, she had taken control of the moment. Her movements were confident, patient, and deliberate. She wasn't rushing, she was orchestrating. Every glance, every word, every touch was part of something larger. Something she was clearly in control of. And the craziest part? I let her. We didn't rush to the bedroom. She pushed me down onto the couch, like she already knew how this would go. I tried to take the lead once, maybe twice, but she shut it down with nothing but a look and a whispered command. I wasn't used to that. I wasn't used to being the one who followed. And I liked it. What happened in the next hour flipped everything I thought I knew about myself on its head. I'd never been touched like that, handled like that. She didn't just want me, she used me. Not in a cruel way, but with such confidence and clarity that it felt like I was a part of something bigger than myself. She knew exactly what she wanted, and she took it, unapologetically. I lost track of how many times I trembled, how many times I whispered her name under my breath, how many times she told me to wait just a little longer. I was sweating, breathless, and still she moved like she was just warming up. By the time it was over, I couldn't move. I was completely undone. She stood, composed as ever, smoothed out her clothes like nothing had happened, and gave me a soft smile. "You're fun," she said, "but you've got a lot to learn." And just like that, she walked back into the kitchen, like she hadn't just redefined everything I thought I knew about desire. I've never looked at confidence the same way since. Story 6. Okay, I need to get this off my chest. There was this party last weekend, nothing crazy, just a typical house full of too loud music, warm beer, and half-familiar faces. At one point, I had to step away for a breather. I'd just thrown up, classy I know, and needed a quiet place to regroup, so I ducked into one of the bedrooms. I was sitting on the edge of the bed, trying to get my head together, when this guy walks in. He had that whole awkward energy, nervous smile, hands stuffed in his hoodie pocket, like he wasn't quite sure how he ended up there. Kinda sweet, honestly. At first, I figured he was just checking if someone was in the room. Then he says it, straight-faced, stammering a little. 20 quid if you show me your muffins." I blinked. "Are you serious?" I asked, half laughing. He nodded, turning a little red. It was so unexpected, I didn't even know what to say. I told him to get lost, obviously. But then, he comes back with, "Okay, 50. And I paused. I mean, I'm not proud of it, but I was flat broke. Rent was due. Groceries were a guessing game that week. And £50? That's food in the fridge. That's a bill paid. So, after a long internal debate that lasted all of 15 seconds, I shrugged and said, "Fine." I pulled off my crop top and gave him a little show. Nothing over the top, just enough to make him go wide-eyed and way too flustered. Honestly, it was kind of entertaining. He didn't know where to look. I almost felt bad for him, but not enough to put my shirt back on before I got paid. Then, get this, he pulls out his wallet again, all shaky hands and red cheeks, and says, I'll give you pound 200 if you go a little further. I stared at him. 200 pounds. It caught me off guard. I wasn't expecting it. And yeah, a part of me was like, absolutely not. But another part, one that had checked her bank balance way too many times that week, was thinking, that's groceries for a month. So I made a decision. I closed the bedroom door behind me. What happened next isn't something I need to spell out, but let's just say, he got what he paid for, and I got what I needed. He was awkward, overly enthusiastic, and clearly in over his head, but in a strangely endearing way. When I stepped back out into the party, no one batted an eye. I grabbed a drink, took a long sip, and pretended like nothing out of the ordinary had happened. But something had, and I've been thinking about it ever since. Not because I regret it. Not because I'm proud of it, but because sometimes life throws you moments that are messy, complicated, and strangely human. And this one? Yeah, this one's staying with me for a while. Story 7. This is a story from about 10 years ago, back when I was 20 and dating someone I'll call Sarah. We were still in that early electric phase of dating, when every look meant something, and even the smallest touch felt like a secret. Sarah and I didn't have many places to be alone. We both lived at home, so most of our time together happened in my car. Usually out in the forest, not creepy, more like peaceful and private. It became our spot, our little escape. That night, Sarah had gone out clubbing with her best friend, Ash. I offered to pick them up afterward, partly to save them the long bus ride, but mostly because Sarah and I had already made plans for a little detour on the way home. She'd been sending me messages throughout the night. Let's just say they weren't exactly subtle. Things like, hope you're ready for me, and I've been thinking about you all night. I was wide awake, watching the clock, counting down until I could see her. When they finally walked out of the club just after 2 a.m., I was waiting at the curb. Sarah was wearing this bright pink dress that hugged her perfectly. She looked amazing, confident, glowing from the night out. But it was Ash who caught me off guard. I'd never met her before, taller, brunette, and with this cool, quiet attitude that made you instantly aware of her presence. She wasn't trying to get attention, but she had it anyway. Sarah did what she always did, walked straight over to the car, leaned in, and kissed me like she hadn't seen me in weeks. Right in front of Ash. No hesitation. I remember thinking, okay, this might be a long ride. We got settled in, Ash in the back seat, Sarah up front with me. The drive to Ash's place was easy. They were laughing about their night, while I tried to keep my eyes on the road and not on Sarah's hand casually resting on my thigh. When we pulled up to Ash's street, Sarah turned to say goodbye, but froze mid-turn and burst out laughing. Oh my God, Ash, you're basically flashing the whole car, she said between laughs. I glanced in the rearview mirror. Ash just raised an eyebrow and smirked like it was no big deal. And then, I don't know what came over me, but I joked, maybe she should just stay in the back while we finish our night. I meant it as a throwaway line. One of those things you say and instantly expect to be laughed off. But instead, Sarah turned to Ash and asked, dead serious, do you want to watch? What really threw me was Ash's answer. She just smiled and said, sure. And listen, I tried to play it cool, but inside I was scrambling. I adjusted the rearview mirror just enough to see her. She met my eyes without blinking, completely calm. Something about the way she looked at me told me she wasn't bluffing. Sarah leaned in again, whispering something that made my heart skip. Her hand moved a little higher on my leg. I knew what she was going for. The kind of tension where no one says what they're really thinking, but everyone knows. We drove straight to our usual forest spot, with Sarah's hand never leaving mine, and Ash watching quietly from the back seat. I was trying to breathe normally, but everything felt like it was on fire. When we parked, Sarah didn't waste time. She pulled me into a kiss, more intense than before, like she'd been holding back all night. And in the mirror, Ash was still there. Still watching. Still not saying a word. Eventually, Sarah pulled away from me and looked back at her friend. She's enjoying the view, she whispered, teasing. I nodded, barely able to speak. So am I. The car was quiet except for our breathing. No one rushed. No one needed to. It was one of those rare moments where everything just aligned. Like you knew you'd remember it for a long, long time. We didn't say much on the way home. Just quiet laughter and that shared look between people who've experienced something unspoken. Story 8. It started off as something completely innocent. I was borrowing my husband's laptop to send a file. Nothing unusual. But while navigating through his external drive, I stumbled on a folder. It didn't have a name, just a string of random letters and numbers. For some reason, that made me pause. Curiosity got the best of me. I clicked. Inside, dozens of photos and videos. At first, I didn't fully process what I was seeing, just flashes of skin, suggestive poses. Then it hit me, these weren't random images. These were people he knew. People we both knew. Some were exes I'd heard about in passing. A few were strangers. And one was a friend of mine. Someone he'd been with before we ever got together. And it wasn't just selfies or flirtatious snapshots. These were intimate, deeply personal moments he'd kept, tucked away in a digital corner. My stomach twisted. First came the jealousy. The kind that burns hot behind the ribs. I couldn't believe he'd held on to this, these glimpses into his past, into moments that had nothing to do with me. I felt like I'd stepped into a room I was never meant to see. But something strange happened. As I kept watching, clicking, scrolling, replaying, my emotions shifted. The jealousy, the anger, it started to blur into something else. Something I didn't expect. Curiosity. Then arousal. I watched how they moved with him. How they touched him. How he responded. There was something raw about it. Real. And in a strange way, it made me see him differently, not just as my husband, but as a man others had wanted. Had craved. Had loved in their own messy, passionate ways. When I reached the videos with my friend, I couldn't look away. Not because of betrayal or pain, but because of comparison. Contrast. I saw how she kissed him. How she looked at him. And I thought about how I do the same. How we're different. How we're the same. And that mix of emotions, jealousy, desire, vulnerability, it overwhelmed me. I won't lie. I ended up closing the laptop with flushed cheeks and a racing heart. I haven't told him I found the folder. Maybe I will. Maybe I won't. For now, it's my secret. A window into a version of him I didn't expect to see, but can't stop thinking about. Story 9. So yeah, I'm 19, just finished my first year of college, and now I'm back in my hometown for the summer, working at this beachside bar. It's loud, packed every night, and full of tourists who forget how to tip and locals who pretend they own the place. I'm a server, which means I spend most nights dodging drunk guys and balancing trays of overpriced cocktails in tiny shorts. The money's decent. The tips, even better. But the real entertainment? That starts after close. I work with this crew, 3 guys and 1 girl, all in their 20s or early 30s. They're laid back, hilarious, and definitely not shy when it comes to flirting. I'd only been there a few weeks, but I already knew the whole hookups between co-workers thing was kind of an unspoken tradition. Late nights, too much tequila, and a lot of tension that no one really bothers to hide. Honestly, I was curious. But I also didn't want to be that girl, the new one jumping into something messy. So I kept it cool. Until last night. We were cleaning up after a wild night, music still playing, lights low, everyone a little buzzed from post-shift drinks. One of the guys, scruffy beard, always smells like whiskey and laughs with his whole chest, teased me about the way I worked the floor in my shorts. I rolled my eyes, but I could feel the heat in my face. Then the other girl, tattoos, killer confidence, and a don't mess with me attitude, looked me up and down and said, "Bet you'd be fun to play with." My heart was pounding. I don't know what came over me, maybe it was the drinks, maybe it was the vibe, but I smirked and said, "Try me." And just like that, everything changed. Next thing I know, we're in the back storage room. The door's locked. The air feels different, thicker, charged. The music is still playing faintly from the front, but back here, all I can hear is my own heartbeat. One of the guys leaned in close, brushed a strand of hair from my face, and whispered something that made my skin prickle. Someone else laughed softly, and suddenly hands were brushing over my arms, teasing the hem of my shirt. It was playful at first, just touches, glances, the kind that make your stomach flip. Then the tattooed girl stepped closer. She tucked a finger under my chin, made me look her in the eyes, and said, "Let's see how bold you really are." The next few minutes were a blur of heat and tension and hands everywhere. My back pressed against a wall of crates, soft gasps, lips on my neck, someone's fingers tracing the waistband of my shorts. One guy stood behind me, his breath hot against my ear. Another leaned in front, his eyes never leaving mine. She was the ringleader, somehow, commanding, teasing, making me feel like the center of a game I didn't even know I'd agreed to play. I'd never felt so exposed and excited at the same time. Every move felt deliberate. Every glance meant something more. No one said what we were doing. No one needed to. We stayed in that room longer than I expected. When we finally stepped back out into the quiet of the closed bar, everyone was flushed, laughing under their breath, hair a little messy, shirt slightly untucked. But no one said a word about it. Today, we're all back at work like nothing happened. They're acting normal, but there's this look in their eyes when they pass me, like a secret we're all pretending not to remember. And me? I'm still replaying it all in my head. Still wondering how it happened. Still wondering if it's going to happen again. Is it weird that I kind of hope it does? Story 10. Someone asked me to describe my boyfriend a little more, so here's a quick picture. Eli is calm. Not the loud, center-of-the-room type, more like the guy who watches everything and says just enough. He's about 5 feet 8 inches, built thick from the gym. That's actually where we met, with brown wavy hair and eyes that match. He's got this quiet intensity, but also this softness with me. And yeah, he's kind of addicted to saying yes when I want something. I don't abuse it, but I definitely enjoy it. We haven't really talked about that night. The one where we dipped our toes into something different. A little forbidden. A little thrilling. But ever since then, there's been this energy between us. Like we're both waiting for someone to make the next move. Last night I did. I had plans to grab drinks with 2 of my girlfriends. Nothing major, just a night out. But I felt like testing the waters. So I pulled out this black mini dress I haven't worn in over a year. It's one of those dresses that makes you do a double take in the mirror. Low neckline, short hem, clings in all the right places. I didn't wear a bra. Just 2-inch heels and a little smirk. When I stepped out of the bathroom, Eli was sitting on the edge of our bed, phone in hand. He looked up and froze. "You're wearing that?" he asked, not judging, just absorbing. I tilted my head. "Too much." I smiled. "I'll probably be getting a lot of attention tonight." He didn't say anything for a second. Just looked at me. Then he smiled, soft and unreadable. "Have fun." I walked over and kissed his cheek, but leaned in close to his ear and whispered, "Don't worry. I'll try not to let anyone buy me a drink, unless he's really hot." I giggled like I was kidding. I wasn't. As I turned to leave, I felt his hand slide up the back of my leg, under the hem of my dress. Just a quick touch, as if to say, remember who you belong to. I looked back at him, and for a second, I thought he might pull me back. But instead, he let me go. At the bar, the attention came quickly. Guys brushing past too close. One of them, tall, confident, definitely attractive, asked if he could buy me a drink. I let him. We talked. He flirted. At one point, his hand rested on my thigh, just a little too long. I stopped him with a smile, thanked him for the drink, and walked away before it went further. But the whole time, I couldn't stop thinking about Eli. About the way he looked at me when I left. About the way his fingers lingered on my skin like a warning. By the time I got home, I was warm from the drinks and buzzing from the tension. I walked through the front door and found him waiting on the couch. He didn't say anything. Just stared at me with this look I couldn't quite read, but I felt it. It was all over me. I dropped my purse by the door and barely took another step before he crossed the room and pressed me against the wall. His hands gripped my waist, and his voice was low, rough around the edges. "I met someone at the bar," I whispered. He was cute. Very hard to resist. I paused, caught his eyes. But I did. He didn't say anything. Just kissed me hard. Like he'd been waiting for hours to do it. Like he needed to take back everything I'd teased him with. Things got intense fast. He didn't let me catch my breath. There was something in the way he touched me, possessive, urgent, like he wanted to remind me who I came home to. And in the middle of it, I couldn't help but whisper things that made his grip tighten and his breathing change. What if I let him? What if I kissed him? Would you still want me if I came home smelling like someone else? His response? He pulled my head back gently and growled, "You're mine." And I said the only thing I could. "Then make me yours." He did. Afterward, I could barely stand. My knees were weak, my heart was pounding, and I think we both knew this wasn't just a one-time thing. This was something new. A current running between us now. A game. A story we're writing together. And I've got a few ideas for the next chapter. Story 11. The bus was packed, thick with heat, the scent of sunscreen, and the closeness of bodies pressed too tightly together. I stood in the narrow aisle, scanning the rows for a place to sit. There was only one seat left. I turned to her, my sweet French friend, and shrugged with a grin. "Looks like you'll have to sit on me." I meant it as a joke. Kind of. Mostly. She gave me a look, equal parts playful and knowing, and slid into my lap like it was the most natural thing in the world. Her light skirt fluttered around her legs as she settled in, straddling me with the ease of someone who didn't mind bending the rules of personal space. Next to us, on the same seat, sat a redhead with freckles across her nose and cheeks, dressed in a short summer dress and a cropped top that showed just a peak of toned stomach. She glanced at us with polite surprise at first, but there was something behind her eyes. A flicker of curiosity. Or maybe interest. The bus lurched forward. Every bump in the road sent my friend shifting slightly on my lap. The way her hips moved, subtle, unintentional, or maybe not, kept brushing her body against mine. I tried to ignore it. Tried to stay still. But I could feel her shifting rhythm. The way she leaned in a little closer. Her breath grazing my neck. And then came the glance, the one she gave me over her shoulder, lips curled in a barely there smirk. Like she knew exactly what she was doing. I swallowed hard. Focused on the passing trees outside the window. But the space between us didn't exist anymore. Her hands rested lightly on my shoulders. Her thighs pressed against mine. My thoughts were louder than the engine. Then I noticed her. The redhead. She'd been quiet, but her eyes were anything but. She watched us, subtly at first, then more openly. Her gaze flicked between us, lingering a second too long. Her lips parted slightly, as if she were about to say something and stopped herself. Her fingers curled around the hem of her dress, tugging it idly upward. Just a little. I couldn't help it. I looked back at her. Our eyes met, and she smiled. Not a shy smile. Not a nervous one. A slow, confident, I see you kind of smile. The tension was thick now. My friend shifted again, and this time, her breath caught just slightly. Her posture changed, hips moving in a slow, deliberate rhythm. She leaned forward, whispering something in French I didn't quite catch, but her tone said everything. I felt my pulse jump. And then, bold as anything, she reached back, took my hand, and guided it to her waist. She didn't say a word, just held it there. The redhead's eyes followed the motion, then dropped to where our bodies touched. I swear I saw her cheeks flush just a little. But she didn't look away. Instead, she leaned closer. I don't think I've ever seen a bus ride quite like this, she said, voice low and teasing. My French friend looked at her, tilted her head, and smiled. It's more fun than it looks. The three of us sat in that charged silence for another stretch of road. No one moved too fast. No one pushed too far. But every glance, every shift, every exchanged smile was electric. When the redhead stood to get off at her stop, she paused, turned back to us, and said with a wink, "Nice to meet you too. I hope your ride stays interesting." Then she was gone. We didn't speak for a minute after that. Just sat in the warm hum of the bus, the echo of something unsaid hanging between us. I looked at my friend. She looked at me, and we both smiled. Because sometimes there's a kind of intimacy that doesn't need to be spoken out loud. A moment that lingers, that teases, that waits for what might come next. And I had a feeling this wouldn't be the last time we blurred the lines between friends and something more. Story 12. So this happened at Trader Joe's of all places. I was doing my usual grocery run, wandering through the vegetable section like a lost soul debating between kale and cookies, when I noticed a guy standing next to me. Probably early 40s, salt and pepper beard, worn button-up shirt that said I just got off work and I'm barely holding it together. I reached for a cucumber and an eggplant at the same time, don't judge me. And without missing a beat, he chuckled and said, "There's definitely a joke here, but I'm too tired to find it." I smiled and replied, "Yeah, men being too tired is why I need these." He froze for half a second, then burst out laughing. "Touché," he said, shaking his head. We kept bumping into each other up and down the aisles, and eventually ended up in the same checkout line. When we walked out, I realized our cars were parked right next to each other. I figured, what the hell, and asked if he could help me load my groceries. As he put the bag with the eggplant in my trunk, I said, "This is the only time a man gets to put an eggplant in my car." He paused, laughed again, and said, "You have a crude sense of humor, but I enjoy it." What I liked was that he didn't get weird or sleazy about it, just relaxed. So I tested the waters a bit more and asked, "Want to help me unload at home too?" He blinked like I'd caught him totally off guard. So I reached into a bag, pulled out the cucumber, and handed it to him with a raised brow. "Imagine how bored I'll be if you run off with this instead of following me." And then I got in the car. He followed. At my place, he helped carry the bags inside. As I put groceries away, I offered him a drink and told him to make himself comfortable. He sat down but started glancing around, probably saw the framed photos and asked cautiously, "Are you married?" The air shifted slightly, and I knew it was time to be clear. I walked into the living room, stood between his knees, and said, "Let's not make this complicated." He gave me this look, half hesitation, half disbelief, and asked, "Shouldn't I at least know your name?" "Susie," I said. "Now stop overthinking it." He laughed, stood up, and from there, well, let's just say we got to know each other a little better. Fast. He was sweet, a little awkward, but definitely into it. There was a lot of laughing, a little fumbling, and a very memorable moment involving the cucumber I'd bought earlier. No, I'm not going into detail. Let's just say it definitely wasn't used for a salad. Afterward, he tried to rally for round 2, bless him, but the energy wasn't quite there. I handed him a towel, offered him water, and eventually walked him to the door. And then, well, let's just say I had one ingredient left from that grocery run that hadn't been used yet. The eggplant. Let your imagination fill in the rest.